Good evening, everyone. I would like to take you through the remaining parts of what we left during our last session of policy framework in education. I hope you still remember the contents that I showed you in the last session, including introductions, terminologies, features, main features of education policies, development of education policy in Tanzania, education policy making models, education policy making processes, types of evaluation, etc., plus other concepts. Also, the key questions for exploration that you should consider includes: what is it, policy? What is education policy? How is it formed? Any history, any examples of policies you know in Tanzania, etc. And I remember I took you through various definitions of the concept of policy, and I told you to go through various literature to see what they define, how they define the concept of policy and education policy, so to say, in our context. And in that way, when you will be reviewing various definitions, you will see different forms of policy expressions, including declarations, acts of parliament, political statements, or totality of what the government does directly or through the state and non-state actors. And I remember we also went through definitions and nature of education policy, and we oriented ourselves on the thinking that when we are talking about policy, we have to think about different levels of education, from early childhood to higher education. And also characteristics of education policy, try to discuss this in your groups so that you can understand the way education policy can be differentiated from other kinds of public policies, including the issues, various issues that can be addressed by policy. And I think you have seen it when we started the session. We went through our education training policy, the current version that we had, and we see various issues that are part and parcel of the policy and various issues that can be addressed by the policy. So, and we also discussed about the importance of policy framework in education so that we can be able to link the content of this module plus the content of the module in line with our course, education management and administration. We also went through various terminologies, and with this I don't have any, I know you will not have any issue because you saw the policy before we venture into these terminologies. So I understand through your discussions you can quickly understand and analyze various terminologies which are key in this course. That is the just overview of various concepts, including policy response, performance, instrument analysis, inducement, plus the reflection. So understanding the concepts should take you to the reflection. For example, when you choose the certain statement, what can be the performance? What can be the instrument in line with that? Those are some of the questions that you can be asked in your evaluation, end of semester evaluation, or maybe test in between. We also went through features of education policy, is public policy, public nature of education policy, many features of education policies, characteristics and functions of policies, categories of public policies, including distributive, redistributive, regulatory, self-regulatory, etc. And what I wanted to emphasize today is the development of education policy in Tanzania, where we are trying to check the evolution from the pre-colonial times to date. And what we are supposed to discuss in the pre-colonial time is just to trying to figure out what happened in education during the pre-colonial times, what nature of activities that we had in relation to education. You all understand from our history that we had indigenous African education with the purpose of just passing knowledge from one generation to another. We also had some Quranic schools, Christian missionaries, which established various institutions in different parts of our country. And in this period, education was provided on the basis of gender, religion, and ethnicity. Just try to pull up your history of education in our country. During the colonial times, education was promoted to realize colonial policies. So every colonial master was trying to figure out education in the context which can favor his interest. So we had the advisory committee in education, we had mass education, we had various acts of education in this colonial period, including the Education Ordinance of 1927, adult literacy campaigns where we were trying to reduce the literacy among people in the society. Memorandum of Education, not understanding, sorry. Memorandum of Education for Citizenship in Africa, which prepared people for democracy. 10-year development plan, the expansion of primary and middle schools, expansion of teacher training, and establishment of technical education. And then soon after independence, we also had different kinds of system, and this marks the first mark of our education philosophy, which is socialism and education for self-reliance, in 1961 to 67, where we had the Education Act number 37 of 1962, with elimination of colonial discriminative education. Remember, this time we were like trying to eliminate all colonial issues, colonial interests, which were part and parcel of education system and the society in general. And what was emphasized was inculcating the culture of socialism and equality, promoting unity through the use of Kiswahili language so that we can unite ourselves as a nation, etc. So this is what happened during socialism education of self-reliance in 1961 to 1967. Also, during 1967 to 78, we had the so-called Universal Primary Education, UPE, and the Msoma Resolution, with different acts, including Education Act of 1969, Musoma Resolution, nationalization of all schools, Prime Minister's Directive 1973 on workers' education and programs for all workers, Education Act number 25 of 1978, where government was a sole provider of education, and we had ideas of compulsory education for all with increasing enrollment and general expansion of primary and secondary schools. This was during 1967 to 78. Then during the 1980s to 90s, we had the Makweta Commission led to the expansion of secondary education and also establishment of professional teacher associations, etc. After the 1990s between 1990s to 2000, we had another mark. From that of 1967, we had another very remarkable revolution in our education policies, where we had a review of our education system to suit the needs. And that is the phase that we had three great policies: 1995 Education and Training Policy, 1999 Higher Education Policy, and the 1996 National Technical and Vocational Education Policy. And the task force was formed to review and came up with a report which was later decided to be the basis for the policy. So we had this was like another mark in our country in terms of education policies that were formed during this period. Then we had 2000s to 2005, where our nation experienced a lot of unemployment of graduates and mismatch between the graduates and the world of work, brain drain, where a lot of youth went out of the country to search for employment and life in general. So we were advised, following this problem, the country it was advised that institutions, for example, higher education institutions, should produce job creators than job seekers. That is where some universities, for example, University of Dar es Salaam, decided to develop the entrepreneurship development policy to support the university and the students to inculcate enterprising tendencies and enterprising behaviors among students. And following the development of all the policies, it resulted into the development of the 2014 Education and Training Policy. And this was also emancipated or facilitated by restructuring also of the Ministry of Education, the then Ministry of Education and Vocational Training, which is currently the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. And from this policy, the review and the analysis is what we got our newest version, which is version 2023 of our new policy. So in short, that is the short history about the education policy in our country. Now, after the history, we have to think about education policy making models, which various approaches that education policy can be formed or have been formed, some of our policies, and you have different approaches, including synoptic model, which proposes that single central planning authority for the whole society becomes responsible for policy making. So the assumption of this model is that a single authority can sit down and try to develop the policy. There's no need, it assumes that there's no need of too much interaction of different people to sit down and negotiate about a certain policy making process, because they believe that the problem at hand does not go beyond man's cognitive capacities. So a single authority can be enough to develop the policy. And incremental model or approach relies on interaction. This is no different with the synoptic. This believes in interaction rather than complete analysis of the situation to develop or guide solve education problem, because it is believed that only incremental changes and limited policy adjustment can be made. In most cases, it believes that policies, the way they are made and remade, only incremental changes do happen, not, in most cases, not the overhaul of the policy. So only few adjustments can be made, can be feasible to be made. And when you are trying to analyze some of our policies, you can see this model has been employed in some of our policies. Now, coming to political organizational model, this is now a mixture of incremental and rational model, where policy making here is more political activities characterized by self-interest, bargaining, value judgment, and multiple rationalities. Yeah, and in most cases, most of our policies falls somewhere between these two extremes, political and rational. So rational model on the other side is now the composite again of the synoptic and the organizational model, where decision making in this centrally controlled, complete technical and value maximizing. So apart from the models, these models helps us to understand the way different policies have been made or can be made. So they are essential. It is an essential section to understand in the educational policy framework. Another content is education policy making processes, which is talking about how the policy making process starts and how it ends. The cycle of education policy making process, which include various integrated processes, including problem identification, generation of policy options, evaluation of policy options, making the policy decision, planning of policy implementation, policy evaluation, and subsequent policy cycles. So the first step of problem identification, this is like the starting point. They include getting methods of getting issues on political agenda. To get on the agenda, problems must come to policymakers' attention, trying to bring forth the problems, education problems, into policymakers' attention. So that is what we call the problem identification, which includes agenda setting, which is the process by which policy issues are determined and prioritized, and where some of the issues and solutions gain or lose education stakeholders or allied attention. So it is a very important phase or stage of the policy, where, because it's right from the beginning, that is where, according to the goals, we can try to think about what is the problem, to think and to put goals and targets, so that at the end we can we can solve it is through putting through directions, through various directions, implementation strategies, etc. There are various ways where problems can be brought into agenda by using media, lobbying, advocacy, etc. So after bringing forth the problem, the next stage is generating policy options, which involves formulation of goals and objectives, identification of problem, thinking about possible solutions. After goals, then you can formulate a statement. Then statements are linking to policy issues and objectives. Then commitment to solve those problems should be specific enough to bear solution. Then stage 3 is the policy development now, because that is the design stage where you can think about the way you see it, like the way we started looking at it. I think you saw the cover page, the preliminary pages, chapters, introduction, current situation, vision, mission, etc. So after the design, what follows the policy adoption? Is adoption of the policy. Then the adoption takes place when the policy document has been completed. So you can check legislative arrangements. Some policies may require maybe laws, and other may not require any legislative changes, etc. So this is the process of making sure that the designed policy is adopted for action. Then after adoption follows the implementation. Once the policy has been adopted, it becomes ready for implementation. We put actions into rules, regulations. Different organizations and agencies are given mandates to do different actions to implement various policy options and statements. Human resources, maybe reschedule human resources, etc. And we all understand that implementation requires resources, financial resources, technical resources, personnel, etc. And then this is the last stage, which can bring the cycle in the beginning, where we assess the success of the policy in terms of content evaluation, where we can check does the content clearly articulate the goals of the policy, and policy implementation. We evaluate, was the policy implemented as intended? The implementation is very crucial in this point in time, because it can provide important information about what are the barriers, what can we do to make them implemented enough. And then you can also evaluate policy impact, where some of the questions include, like, did the policy produce intended outcomes and impact? Something like this. So it is very important to evaluate whether short-term and intermediate outcomes, or even results as well. So the impact evaluation does not mean that you have to wait until maybe 5 years or 10 years to assess the impact of the policy, but you can also assess short-term, like, results or outcomes of various policy options. There are different types of evaluation. As I've said, there's content evaluation, implementation evaluation, and impact evaluation. So evaluation components include specifying the goals, identifying unintended consequences, identifying who benefits, who suffers, and examine both outputs and outcomes. So it is very important to evaluate policy, because you get information about policy formation, you contribute. It's through evaluation where you can get new policies, because if you don't evaluate, then you may not tell which policy options are feasible or not feasible, they've been done in a right way or wrong way. So it also contributes to clarification and various critiques that can undermine selection of goals and objectives. You can use various criteria for evaluation, for example, effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and responsiveness. And we all understand the resources that we have in our countries. So sometimes education policy evaluation are facing various limitations, including changes of policy goals in the mid, that before, at the end of the evaluation, maybe some goals have been changes. changing, which does not go hand in hand with the resources available, or insufficient planning for monitoring and evaluation. For example, in most cases, sometimes we don't have baseline data which we can compare it with the end-line information to check the impact. So there are various limitations in our country. We can think about many. The other important section is the relationship between the policies, strategies, and plans, because it is from policies where the strategies are developed from policies, and then plans are like action plans to implement the strategies. Because from policies are in line with the constitution, they show the government commitments, etc. And then the strategy sets direction for achieving those goals. And then plan layout lay out a roadmap for concrete actions to achieve the strategies that have been planned. There are various actors. This is another important content. Actors in education policy. I remember when we were going through this course during my studies, my instructor told us to mention 50 actors that we know in education. So I think you're also in a position to say that, because we've all been in schools as teachers, as students, as parents, community members, etc. So this is something that you can mention as many actors as possible. For example, teachers, learners, parliamentary committees, politicians, media, ministry responsible for various stakeholders, for instance, children, youth, development issues, various agencies responsible for education, for example, NECTA, NACTIVATE, TAI, TEA, etc. So all these are important key education policy actors who are important for policy processes. We are facing a lot of challenges in Tanzania because we have been also stakeholders. You are in a position, I believe you're in a position to mention some of these challenges, including lack of resources, or inadequate. We should say inadequate, because we have resources, but sometimes they are not adequate. Low commitment in policy implementation. Top-down approach been used in most cases. Sometimes we receive some of the policies from the global communities and we just borrow them wholesale without even trying to contextualize them to fit our context. So these are some of the challenges. What are the factors that can influence policy change? There can be many factors. We understand the way, for example, political leadership change can completely change the direction of our policies. Changes in public opinion, changes in philosophy, because our philosophies also do change over time. Changes in technology, we all understand these days, like you're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about big data analytics, etc. So how are you making sure that all these kind of changes are reflected in your education policies? So these kind of things influence the policy change. Changes in resource availability, you may get some problems like COVID-19, etc., and other calamities that can happen. So all this can influence policy change. So how can you try to link this? Can you try to link the policy framework with education management, administration, and planning? Think about it. Okay. All in all, we should say understanding policy framework is essential for us as professionals in education management and administration, because it provides foundation for effective implementation of educational objectives, because it is our role as education managers to supervise various activities. So we cannot supervise activities if you're not aware of the national education goals, you're not aware of the objectives, you're not aware of government commitments to conduct various policy options. So it is very important for us to be aware of the policy, of our current policy and the statements and the way they've been made, the approaches, so that we can try to link all these factors to the effective implementation of objectives, because we are the frontline implementers of education policy. With this short presentation about the remaining part of the education policy framework, I would like to say thank you so much for for listening. I'm sure you'll be listening to this video now and then, including going through various literature as I have advised, so that we can try to link this content with the rest of the content in education management and administration. Good evening. Thank you so much.